February 3rd, 2025, and we are here at Enchanted Rock State Natural Area in Central Texas, and we're checking out these vertical-sided megaliths made of pink granite. I guess the pink doesn't have to be in quotes. And the granite, at least it's a name for the material. That's good. Thank you, geology. But is it natural granite that just burped up? That's what they tell us. It just burped up from below. And because the material is harder than the surrounding gypsum, the gypsum has been weathering, eroding away, and leaving this series of granite domes exposed. And they call it a monadnock. That's one word, monadnock. Thanks, geology. Jeez. Yes, you do have a plethora of terminology, and maybe you can make it sexier. Monadnock doesn't really work. Let's think up some better names, okay?
Hi, I'm Kelsey Johnson. And I'm Rachel Esch, and we're the interpreters at Monadnock.
Granite, we'll keep it for now, okay? But it's not natural. All of this is concrete. It's pink crystalline concrete laid down by the true ancients who built the continents, okay? Now, what these domes have below them is really what interests me. I'm looking for a tunnel system. I'm looking for what's below, because every time we find a pyramid complex, and this is a dome complex, and it's essentially a pyramid complex, except that the shape of the structures is not four-sided, but circular. There's always a tunnel system below the ancients building. The ancients built the pyramids. The true ancients built the structures that are the landscape that sometimes resemble pyramids, like in the Bosnian Pyramid Complex. So the Bosnian Pyramid Complex is a late-stage terraforming project, and there are pyramid-like structures along with the hills and what we would call tumuli, which are conical-shaped objects, and other structures that are part of the landscape. They're not sitting on the earth. So I distinguish between the true ancients who built the continents and then the Bosnian Pyramid Complex and other late-stage terraforming projects, and the ancients who came much later, repurposed the crystalline concrete of the true ancients, the continental concrete. They powdered it and then cast blocks in situ to make pyramids. So the true ancients came first, then the ancients came much later to build pyramids that are set on the earth, but we have pyramid-like structures and dome complexes and all sorts of other fascinating things that the continent builders built as well. So let's have a look at some of the building of the true ancients. We can call this pink granite if you like. It's pink crystalline concrete laid down in a dome structure on top of which are stacked megaliths. This series of megaliths here, this huge one, and then the two above it, they're slightly smaller. These were all stacked on the original sort of bedrock dome structure. And geology cannot answer the question, how does granite, which is igneous rock, molten rock, stack itself? They don't care to answer that question. They don't ask that question because they don't have an answer for it. But we're going to ask that question today. And the answer is igneous rock cannot stack itself. So all these non-adhered megaliths on the dome, all of these megaliths, these all came down over the centuries, over the millennia. That used to be on the dome, that huge megalith there. All of these are non-adhered. They're all slowly coming down, almost as if they wanted them to come down over time. Otherwise, they would have adhered them. So then we have to ask the question, if they're not adhered, that means they're not natural igneous rock, then who built the crystalline concrete dome complex here? Hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago? Hard to say, but it's been a long time. Almost as if they wanted all of these megaliths eventually to slide off, which they would, of course, eventually, and decompose, leaving the bare dome. And there are several of these domes that are now virtually bare, but imagine this totally covered by stacked megaliths. Now you can see what it looks like now. It's almost completely bare. So now that it's bare, you go, I wonder why they wanted to leave their megaliths non-adhered so that they would therefore slip off and erode, leaving the bare dome exposed? Why do they want their domes exposed? It's a question. Maybe this is the time to find out what's underneath this dome city. Let's continue our journey and let's explore some more features of this complex of domes built in the distant past by advanced races. So we're down at the level of the creek and the dome is to our right, and this is the bedrock material right here. If this is natural granite, why is there a straight line seam in this material? And for people who say, oh, it's just a crack, well, does that look like a crack to you? Or does it look like an integral seam? Does this look like it's breaking apart? Or is it being joined together strongly? In the stacked megalith above it, and we still have to ask the question, how is granite stacking itself? This is not adhered, this is just sitting on it. There's another straight line seam, so we can see that. Very integral. It's two sections of ancient crystalline concrete that have been joined at this seam. It's not a crack, it's not a fracture. And it goes and goes and goes all the way up there. Straight line. Another straight line seam right here. Another straight line seam. There's another straight line seam. And if you wonder what I mean when I say vertical sided megaliths, we have a good vantage point of some of them right here. Those are vertical sided megaliths that were stacked on the dome feature. This whole huge, massive section, far too big for any of our machinery to move. I mean, way, way, way too big. Was just stacked here by an advanced race, and they somehow built it with straight line seams that have survived the ages. I mean, if we tried to build a concrete megalith with the straight line seam, it would be rubble in 1,000 years. This thing is staying strong. Most of the megaliths are staying strong. Let's continue our journey. Now, just in case you're wondering what I'm talking about when I talk about vertical sectioning, I'll just show you a couple examples right here. This one's in the shade, and we have the vertical seam that the advanced races who built this feature created between two sections of their crystalline concrete, and another vertical seam. And we understand, because we have brains, that natural igneous material has no mechanism to make straight line seams. The dome shape here on the south side, this shape is rather irregular. Largely the domes are have a much shallower slope angle, but anyway, you can see what I mean when I say that the megaliths are stacked on the bedrock dome material. So they're not adhered. The reason these haven't come out, presumably, is that they're on a rather level surface, whereas most of the megaliths find themselves on a curving, downward sloping angle. So little by little they come down. You can see at the very top how the top layer of those megaliths is stronger material resisting erosion. So for the first foot or so of the top of these megaliths on either side, there's that U-shaped gap, and on either side there's a megalith. That is stronger material. So they did that throughout the complex. Geology has no explanation for why the top foot of these megaliths should be stronger, but the continental terraforming theory, the building of the continents theory, does have an explanation. They wanted to have their megaliths resist erosion over time, so they made the top stronger. Geology has no explanation for why there's vertical-sided megaliths of granite stacked on a granite dome. Makes no sense geologically. It's impossible. But the continental terraforming theory, the theory that advanced races built the continents and very interesting features like domes, explains all of this. So the continental terraforming theory explains the terrain. The theory of geology just throws up its hands and says, I don't know. It's just the way it happened. So here we have a line, let's call it a line for now, in this material. Let's just call it material. It's not even called concrete. Let's call it material. Now you'll notice that there are no fractures, no cracks anywhere on this structure. It's not breaking apart in any sense of the word, but suddenly there's this line, which geology must call a crack, or as they say, a joint fracture. Every fracture has to be a joint because all their fractures, most of their fractures show that the material is being joined. But of course, there's no such thing as a joint fracture. There's no such thing as a joint that is also a fracture. There's no such thing as a fracture that's also a joint. It's one or the other, but they make this term joint fracture to confuse students. So we have this vertical line. It's not a right angle. It's not perfectly straight, but it is joining two sections of material. And there's no reason for this line to be here if this is natural igneous material, right? There's no reason to have sections in igneous material. And if they say it's breaking apart, well, it's not breaking apart. All we have to do is look at the rest of the feature. It's not breaking apart. So virtually all of these megalithic structures have no cracks whatsoever in them. Now this one has what geology would call a crack, all right? Starts there, goes down, 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 and it says, oh, they say it's a crack, it's breaking apart. Is it? Is it breaking apart? Or is this a seam joining two sections of concrete together? It's totally integral. Virtually straight. You say, And then you've also got the flat side to it, right? This whole side is a vertical flat side, and there's no way that igneous rock is creating vertical-sided megaliths with straight line seams, and that's not a perfectly straight line. So let's just say in a close to a straight line seam. So the evidence supports the continental terraforming theory that advanced races built these features. The evidence does not support the theory of geology. We're standing on the dome now, near where it meets the ground. And you can see the stacked nature of the slabs, in this case, rather flattish slabs. They're all stacked, not adhered, so they're slowly coming down. Most of the megaliths have come down off of the domes. Some still remain. These are slowly coming down. These vertical-sided megaliths, which cannot have formed naturally. They're the same material as the dome. And the dome is supposed to be igneous granite. But we know that these vertical-sided megaliths cannot have formed naturally. And then we look at this dome, and we just look at the material. And we go, there's no cracks or fractures anywhere here. No cracks, no fractures, totally integral. It's not breaking apart in any sense of the word, right? But then we go, so what's this? Suddenly there's a line. We'll just slowly follow it because I need the geologists to follow along, and they're a little slow because they've been indoctrinated since birth, just like the rest of us, right? So for all of us, me included, we go really slow. We're going to try and break out of our indoctrination together, okay? It's going to be fun. It's our first day of school. It meets this seam, and it also meets this seam. None of it's breaking apart. It's just totally integral. But how could igneous rock have these features in it? And the answer is it couldn't. Natural igneous rock could not have those features. It's not breaking apart because we look at it and we go, oh, it's really strong. The only lines that we see in this are essentially straight lines. Here's a little dog leg. And it's so integral it just disappears. And these these straight lines go for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 meters, depending on where you are. You can see one that's probably about 100 meters, maybe longer. Before I came exploring Enchanted Rock before, been here 4 or 5 times and I've made a couple of videos. I already knew it was artificial because I could see the straight line seam and it was supposed to be igneous rock. So before I even came here, it was obvious. By the evidence, not just because I'm guessing. Vertical-sided megaliths stacked on a dome of the same material, impossible for this to be natural geology. Well, here at Enchanted Rock, all we see is signs of building. So the theory of geology is not supported by the evidence. And all we have is evidence. That's all we have when we are trying to support a scientific theory. So let's look at the evidence. So here we have, at the very top, a vertical-sided granite, quote, megalith on top of other, quote, igneous rock material. But if it's igneous, why are there straight line seams in the material? Why are there vertical straight line seams, or any straight line seams at all? Those aren't cracks, those are not fractures. The material is not breaking apart. It remains strong, and it is held together. It is 2 sections there held together by those vertical seams. Those very integral seams. Not cracks, not fractures, not joint fractures, but seams that just happen to be at exactly the same place, left to right, on 2 stacked, non-adhered megaliths. So these are sitting without any adhesion on the dome structure here at the south part, here at Enchanted Rock State Natural Area. There are many domes. So we have these vertical-sided seamage, more vertical seams. There's one there. There's one there. So the evidence supports advanced races building this structure in the distant past. They stacked slabs and vertical-sided megaliths on their domes. Why? Why did they do that? They knew they would come down eventually. They knew they would erode and come down and form this sandy material. It's decomposed granite. So you've got a creek here called Sandy Creek. Well, it's decomposed granite. It's not sand. It's great for building. So all of these megaliths will eventually decompose into decomposed granite, as they call it. Highly prized in the building industry because it's got sharp angular edges and it holds together really well. So you might put it down for a path and it will stay there because the angular edges are packing together really well. So we're looking at the evidence. That's all we're doing. The geologists don't look at the evidence because they cannot deal with the evidence. Their theory cannot hold up when evidence is considered. Okay? So I want to make that super clear. And we come upon what we always see, vertically structured, stacked megaliths. Just sitting there. Pretty well defined vertical sides. Geology has no explanation for verticality. It cannot explain verticality in igneous material. Now let's also look at this. Some different colored material. I wonder what this is. Now remember, this has been here for probably tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions, hundreds of millions of years. I mean, this is homogeneous material, but the true ancients might have wanted to put some other carbon heavy material there, or maybe it just came later. But we can see the vertical sectioning, otherwise totally integral. This section has no cracks or fractures in it. It has seams that join together, but there's no cracking, there's no fracturing anywhere. Totally integral. Totally integral. Everything's joined together. These astonishing domes of crystalline material. Now, crystalline material has quite a lot of interesting properties. So you have to wonder how much energy is being generated and stored here. How much information is stored in this series of granite domes. Granite in quotes, we'll just use that term for now. It's more accurate to call this crystalline concrete, but we can call it granite. But granite encourages us to think that this is something that came into existence through natural forces, but we know that that's not the case because we just looked at the evidence. So whenever we engage the evidence of the terrain across Terra, on all exposed continents, all 5 exposed continents, we find that the evidence shows us very clearly that the continents were built in the distant past, presumably by advanced races.